we're being recorded.
Lovely, thanks Kat. So we'll get started. So good afternoon everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So I'd like to start by welcoming everyone. Just to introduce myself, so my name's Poppy Tuck. I'm an operational manager within the Statutory SEN team, and my role is around overseeing the annual reviews that come in from settings. So this is some training that we're very excited to deliver. We recognise that as a local authority, we're now maintaining a much higher number of plans, and we understand the challenges that this brings across settings and services across Somerset. So we're really hoping that the training this afternoon is supportive and really helps us to continue to work together to improve the quality and timeliness of annual reviews in Somerset. So the training today is going to be delivered by Catherine, who is our Learning and Development Officer. And we were also joined by Ysanne, who from the Educational Psychologist service.
Hi, I'm here.
Do you want to introduce yourself, Ysanne?
Hi, I'm Ysanne Marville from Educational Psychology, and I'm the Senior EP in Taunton. And so pleased to be here to support the training. And I'm able to answer any questions at the end with Poppy and Catherine.
Lovely, thanks, Ysanne. So I will hand over to you, Kat, if you want to introduce yourself and begin the training.
Yes, thanks, Poppy. I'm going to turn my camera off as well, just because I've got a few different things running and I want to make sure all the technology runs smoothly. So I'm Catherine Bird, although most people know me as Kat. I've been in the SEN team as a Learning and Development Officer since April of this year. And my role came about as part of the written statement of action, where Ofsted identified that there was a real need for a Learning and Development Officer to be within the team to look at the training needs of the SEN team itself, but also to lead training to wider services such as yourself. So that's why I'm here today delivering this training. Prior to working for the SEN team, I was a primary school teacher for just about 10 years, and I worked in both London and Bristol. Within those 10 years, I was Key Stage 1 leader for a few years, and also I was the lead for SMSC. So thinking about today, let's go over the session aims. So I want to provide an overview of the annual review process, including expected timescales and how we're calculating due dates. We want to look at what the expectations are for you as the educational setting, but also what you should expect from members of the SEN team within the annual review process to make sure that quality and consistency can be there at all times. I want to look more closely at the annual review report with you. We're going to talk about amendment notices and how we make our decision whether or not we amend, and also to focus on early annual reviews and what the expectations are for you as settings prior to making a request for an early annual review. So I'm sure Poppy said before I had to reboot my computer, but we want to welcome everybody and thank you for attending, because I know September is such a busy month. You know, is it your first month back of the academic year, and so much is going on. This training has come about based on the SEN Code feedback questionnaire, which we received at the end of May, and we had over 60 responses to that questionnaire. So I want to thank all those who took the time to complete that, because it's been really helpful in informing us in terms of what training is required by us as the SEN department. This is a really important channel of communication and feedback between settings and the SEN team, and today is going to form the first in a programme of training that we're going to deliver over this academic year, and there's going to be more information about that at the end of the 90 minutes. The Code of Practice, as we know, it came out in 2015, and this is the first time that any sort of training has been led by the SEN team on annual reviews. So it's a really clear way to see how we want to build on communication channels and areas of development that Ofsted identified when they inspected the local authority in March 2020. I've led this training session 3 times already, or this is the 3rd time. Tomorrow is the last, and I don't know if they're here today, but I know over the course of the 4 sessions, we've had interest from representatives from both Somerset Direct and SENDIAS for because they wanted to come and hear this message. So it's great to see everybody wanting to be on the same page in terms of having the correct and up-to-date information, so that we all can work together to make sure we're supporting children and young people and families as best as we possibly can within the process. So just a reminder, because I know some people are just joining now, to keep cameras off and to be on mute throughout the training. There's quite a lot that I want to get through, so we're going to ask that we don't have questions until the end of the session. There's definitely ample time at the end where we will be able to answer questions, but I'm just conscious if we have questions intermittently, then it might slow us down and we might not be able to get through everything. So your support in that would be much appreciated. And as I said already, we are going to be recording this session, and also we're going to be sharing the slides afterwards. So don't worry about having to take any notes. We're looking at hosting one of the recordings and this slide package on Yammer, which I believe all SENCos can have access to, but we'll communicate where exactly that is at the end of the session, but sorry, at the end of all 4 sessions. So probably next week, I would imagine, because I know there's lots of people that have wanted to come but haven't been able to. So everything will be shared. Okay. I want to start the session by asking you to rate your understanding of the annual review process as it is currently. And I'm going to be using a program called Menti, which, if you have your phones with you, which I hope you do, if you could go into Menti, the address is there, and it's going to ask you for an 8-digit code, which is on screen. And I'd just like you to, based on a rating of 1 to 5, could you give me a score on your level of understanding surrounding the annual review process? So 1 being you've got no idea at all, to 5 being you feel very confident. I'm just going to switch to that screen. So if the code is at the top in case you missed it, and those results should start coming in. So if you click a number 1 to 5 and then click submit, and we should see some on the screen coming up. We're also going to use Menti about halfway through for a bit of a quiz, and I'll be asking the same question at the end of the session. And then we're going to use Menti as well for questions at the end. But if you can't access Menti, you can put your questions in the chat. But if you could do that at the end of the presentation, that would be most appreciated. That's brilliant. I'll just wait another minute or so just in case anyone else is still to add their input. Okay, looks like I think we've got all the ones we're going to get. Okay, this slide here it shows you a 4-minute video that's hosted on the website for the Council for Disabled Children. And it's a really good overview of the annual review process, especially regarding the responsibility of settings. Now, I'm not going to show it today because I want to make sure that we get through everything and we have time at the end for you to ask any questions you might have. But I just wanted to flag this, not only this video, but actually the website and the organisation itself, Council for Disabled Children, because it's a really great place for resources, not only on annual reviews, but it gives some great resources on exemplar plans and what you should be looking for in terms of sort of model contributions from health and social care, for example. So if you're not familiar with this organisation, then it's one to spend some time having a look at if you have time. So let's think about what is the legislation saying about annual reviews. So this comes from the Code of Practice. So it says that EHC plans should be used to actively monitor children and young people's progress towards their outcomes and longer term aspirations. They must be reviewed by the local authority as a minimum every 12 months. Reviews must focus on the child or young person's progress towards achieving the outcomes specified in the plan, and the review must also consider whether these outcomes and supporting targets remain appropriate. So I said in the session aims, this is a really important opportunity to ensure everyone's on the same page in terms of their understanding of the process and what all parties' expectations are. Now, I really want to draw your attention to the point that the Code of Practice is saying, it's stipulating that plans must be reviewed every 12 months, but it isn't saying that they should be amended every 12 months. And in fact, later on in the presentation, I'm going to show you that actually the Code of Practice is sharing the expectation that plans are not expected to be amended all that often. Now, when I shared this presentation with members of the SEN team, some of whom are former SENCOs, they shared with us and with me, which is really interesting, that perhaps they feel certainly it's the case that some settings are going into annual reviews thinking that you have to be suggesting amendments on that annual review report. And perhaps even head teachers are being quite firm in saying that you must be making amendments following each annual review. And this is even before you think about the expectations of parents, that they are sort of holding you to the fact that, oh, we must keep this plan current, so therefore we must be amending each and every time. And I think it's important to share these points that the Code of Practice is making, that the last thing we want you to feel is that if you're ending an annual review meeting and concluding your report that actually, no, this plan can be maintained as it is, that you're doing an annual review correctly, that it's not the goal to be as thorough as possible and to look for anywhere where amendments can be made, otherwise you're not doing it correctly. That's absolutely not the case. So I think it's really important that we're sharing that legislation, that yes, amendments might be made, but there is certainly not that expectation. So we would really benefit from your support on this, and hopefully following this session, your improved understanding, so that you can begin an annual review meeting by really framing that conversation and expectations that whilst everything that's being discussed in that meeting is absolutely important and beneficial to the child and young person, it's absolutely appropriate to conclude the meeting saying that you're in support of the plan being maintained as it is. We've had quite a few queries in terms of who's responsible for conducting the annual review meeting, and therefore I thought this was a good opportunity to go over that. And these points come directly from the Code of Practice. So according to the Code of Practice, the local authority can require maintained schools, maintained nurseries, academy schools, alternative provision academies, PRUs, non-maintained special schools and independent settings approved under Section 41 to convene and hold the meeting on their behalf. And the local authority can request, but not require, non-maintained early year settings, FE colleges or other post-16 institutions to convene and hold the meeting on their behalf. But for some of those FE colleges or post-16 institutions, there may be a stipulation within the contract of agreement when they are agreeing to admit a pupil or young person that they will carry out the annual review. So reviews must be undertaken in partnership with the child and their parent or young person, and must take account of their views, wishes and feelings, including their right to request a personal budget. Again, that's direct from the Code of Practice. When I shared these slides with Somerset Parent Carer Forum, they wanted to make it very clear that it should be both the voice of the parent and the child or young person that's included. It's not a case of one or the other. And in fact, I was in a meeting today where it was joined by different multi-agency members, and we were looking at annual reviews, and there was a real clear focus that not only do we need the child's or young person's views and the parents' views, but it's really important to make it clear whose views are being recorded so that that's clear in the annual review report, so we can identify who said this and who said that, for example. So let's have a look at the annual review picture in Somerset, just to give you an idea of the scale of requests that are arriving at the SEN department. And all these figures relate to September 2020 to August 2021. So we're talking about the last academic year. And I'm sharing this because not only do I think it's a really useful exercise to see the numbers we're talking about within Somerset, but it also provides that reference to, again, support why we're following what the Code of Practice states and not amending all plans post-annual review. So we currently have now over 4,000 EHCPs in circulation, which means that the SEND team is processing an average of 250 annual reviews being held each month, which ranged from 10 in August just gone to 450 in November 2020. Each reviewing RO, and RO stands for Assessment and Reviewing Officer, and I'll talk a little bit more about them later on, but they're working on average of 80 to 100 annual reviews at any time. We had just over 3,000 annual review meetings held last academic year, which compares to just under 2,000 the year before and a little over 1,600 the year before that, between the same period. So you can see that's a real improvement in terms of how many annual reviews are being held. In terms of phase transfer deadlines, and I'll talk about deadlines and what the expectations are in a moment, the SEND team completed over 99% of phase transfers within the deadline in the past 2 years. If you compare that to 2018, 2019, we only met that target for less than 30%. That is a massive increase in improvement. When we're talking about all other annual reviews, so non-phase transfer annual reviews, 61% of settings sent us the annual review report within 2 weeks. And we processed 43% of those within 4 weeks, which are the stipulated timescales within the Code of Practice. But just to add a little bit of context to our 4-week deadline, that is calculated based on the date of the meeting. So we are held to 4 weeks from that meeting date, regardless of when we receive the annual review report. So if we don't receive the report until 3.5 weeks after the meeting, we're still judged based on that 4-week deadline, just to put that in context. So the increased number of plans means that we require the settings to maintain plans, which, as I've just mentioned, is supported by the Code of Practice for a large number of settings. I think it's really important to acknowledge the improvement in the SEND team based on even just 12 months ago, but we know that this is something we're still really committed to improving, and sessions like this are definitely part of that improvement journey and how we can improve further on the things we want to work on. So although we have seen a marked improvement in annual review data over the past 12 months, we know there's certainly things we still need to improve. And these points are some of the main things that parents report when they're asked about annual review process. And this is at national level, so this isn't just unique to Somerset. So they might report that they don't feel they get enough notice of the meeting, that reports are not prepared and distributed, or not in enough time for proper consideration and comment before the meeting, therefore meaning there might be surprises sprung on parents at the meeting. They perhaps don't feel that their reviews are always properly recorded. And then there's the feeling that the annual review report might go to the LA, but then they do nothing about it. Or if they do something about it, they're not properly informing the parent or child or young person of their decision. Now, as I said, these relate to national statistics, but I think it's probably fair to say that that last point could have been Somerset 2 years ago. But since then, we've put many processes in place to address this. Although, as I said, we still are really committed to that journey of improvement. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on each step of this diagram in subsequent slides, but I wanted to show you this to really get across that annual review processes are a 5-step process, and the meeting is just one of those steps. And this same diagram again shows you that as per the Code of Practice, steps 1 to 4 is typically delegated to the school setting. And I've already mentioned what the Code of Practice says in terms of who's responsible for holding that meeting. And it also shows you that we're generally talking about an 8-week process with the meeting in the middle, and then we have 4 weeks either side of the meeting to allow for everything to happen. Now, when it comes to amendment notices and the timescale of amendment notices, the Code of Practice is, to be frank, really rather vague in terms of timeliness of amendment notices, because it says it must issue the amendment notice. It must issue the amended EHC plan as quickly as possible and within 8 weeks of the original amendment notice. So this table is therefore more useful and more helpful in showing timescales when the decision at the end of the annual review process is to amend a plan. This comes from our practice standards, which we're in the process of updating, which is why you may not have seen it before. So to be clear, this diagram comes into play at the end of the 8 weeks when the decision is to amend a plan. Later on in the session, we're going to look at in more detail about how that decision is made in terms of whether to amend, maintain, or cease. But the clock of 8 weeks for the timescale of the amendment notice starts when the LA issues the amendment notice, and we prioritise phased transfers over those staying where they are, which is why you might have experienced some variance in terms of how quickly an amendment notice has been sent to you. But I'm going to say it again, there's absolutely not the expectation by any means that all annual review processes should be concluded with the decision that a plan requires amendments. So I know when I was a teacher, I was definitely guilty of thinking that an annual review was just the meeting, but it's really important we understand it's the whole process, and the process must be completed within 12 months of the last. So if we think back to the table on the previous slide, the process is generally 8 weeks when you're thinking about that 5-step diagram. When you are going into an annual review where you know that you're not going to be requesting any amendments, then it's absolutely correct to be holding that meeting 4 weeks before the annual review deadline for in terms of when the 12 months will be up. However, if you are going into an annual review meeting where you know, or if you're going into the process where you know that amendments are going to be requested either by the school or by the family, then you actually need to be allowing for extra time, that additional 8 weeks for amendments, meaning that those meetings need to be held around the 9-month mark. But, and I'll talk about it later on, we really need to be seeing a lot of evidence in order for amendments to be made. And as I've said a lot already, there's not necessarily that expectation that an annual review will result in amendments. And then to make it a little bit more complicated, when we're looking at phase transfers, the SEND regulations stipulate that the local authority must review, amend, and name the setting, the new setting, by either the 31st of March or the 15th of February, depending on what type of educational setting we're looking at, the pupils moving into. So for these children, in order to allow for all the processes to happen in enough time to achieve these deadlines, the annual review meetings must actually be scheduled much further in advance. So for the majority of settings, when we're looking at that 15th of February deadline, that means that the annual review meetings need to be held by the end of the second week in November. But in a few slides' time, I'll go through timings and allowances that the local authority make in order to support settings in meeting these deadlines. So let's look at those 5 steps. So thinking back to that 5-step diagram with the meeting in the middle, step 1 should happen no later than 4 weeks before the meeting, where all the relevant people are made aware of the upcoming meeting and asked for their contributions. And for each step in the diagram, I've tried to specify what the expectations are for the setting, but also what you should be expecting from us as a SEN team. So, as I've said, you should be ascertaining who needs to be contacted for their input based on the needs, outcomes, and provision in the current plan. This needs to make sure it includes relevant health and social care professionals. The parents and the child or young person should be asked for their views, and there should be a deadline for responses. Even prior to this, in terms of what you should be expecting from the SEN team, we should be sending a list of all the children or young people within your setting that requires their plan to be reviewed that term, and that should be sent at least 2 weeks before the start of each term. And I know for this current term that went out at the beginning of July. We send the same lists to the CCG and to any local authority officers responsible for social care. And those lists will also indicate which reviews are focused on transition and which are focused on preparation for adulthood for pupils in Year 9 and above. Now, I have to say that we absolutely acknowledge that there is audit work and multi-agency work going on behind the scenes in terms of contributions made to the annual review process, particularly when we're thinking about health and social care professionals, because we know, for example, they need a lot more than 4 weeks notice in order to submit any sort of contribution, let alone try to attend a meeting based on their pressures within their diaries. And we're also thinking about how annual review due dates need to be shared with these professionals. But I mean, the key message that we need to deliver based on the legislation is that these are minimum timescales, and you can always give more notice to professionals. We also know that we want to think about how on the form that attendance from these multi-agency professionals can be monitored better, so that we as a local authority can be looking at patterns in terms of who is consistently attending and contributing versus who is consistently not, so that then we can put in support ourselves based on their understanding of the process and their expectations. So all linked to step 1, I know, is this letter that went out, as I said, at the beginning of July, and I know it caused quite a bit of confusion when it was sent. So I thought this was a good opportunity to spend a bit of time discussing it, because I know there are lots of nuances within those dates, depending on transition, etc., which can make it rather quite confusing. So this was on the letter in terms of the guidance, and this has changed fairly recently, which is why I know this will have caused a few heads to be scratched. To clarify, this guidance has come from the DfE. It's not something that Somerset has chosen to put in place ourselves. But I gather for many of you, the due dates that were given to you on this letter were different to those that you'd been expecting, which obviously caused confusion. So just to remind you of what the dates are that the DfE is saying, is that in order to prevent ongoing slippage of annual reviews, the DfE advises that the annual review date is whichever is earliest, the latest anniversary of the issuing of the plan, or the anniversary of the local authority decision following annual review, which is, of course, the meeting date plus 4 weeks or 28 days. And you also, on your portal page, should have that due date reflected in the shaded box as per the red arrow, which you should have for each pupil, provided you've been set up as an authenticated user. And I hope that, I know at the start of Somerset, where perhaps new pupils have come to you quite late in the day, it might have taken a little bit of time for everybody to be attached to you, but hopefully that's almost there. The recently edited text box below tries to support in clarifying this date, and just to clarify, the date that's displayed in that 4th box, that's the local authority date. So you need to work back 4 weeks at least when you're scheduling your meeting. Within that text, it also includes an exception point about phase transfers and annual reviews where amendments are going to be requested. But I know it's all well and good having text to explain, but actually examples might be more useful. So I've tried to give some examples now to help you understand what that DfE guidance is saying and how it all works. Okay, so example 1. So we're thinking about a Year 1 child. So he has his plan finalised on the 23rd of June 2020. Following annual review, the local authority decided to maintain his plan on the 17th of June 2021. So based on that date, the next annual review meeting must be held no later than the 20th of May 2022. So we've taken the 17th of June 2021, we've gone forward 12 months, but then back 4 weeks in terms of working out when the meeting should be held. But that assumes that there are going to be no requests for amendments for John Smith's plan, because if there are requests for amendments, in order to allow the annual review process of 8 weeks to occur, plus the additional 8 weeks for amendments to happen, then you need to be holding that annual review around about the 9-month mark. But you would think for that year one child, provided that the plan was well written and it had all the provision it detailed in there, unless that child had experienced significant change to provision or need, then that plan wouldn't be expected to be amended in that first annual review. So that plan would we expect to be maintained. He's not a phase transfer, and therefore it would be appropriate to schedule your meeting 4 weeks before that 12-month anniversary. So a second example. So Sarah Jones, she's in year 5 and she has her plan finalised on the 4th of September 2020. And the first annual review for her plan is held on the 21st of July 2021. But this pupil is a phase transfer now. So at the end of year 5, that's her July annual review date in 2021. Because she's about to go into year 6, according to the timescales, her next annual review should actually be in November in order to meet that 15th of February deadline for everything to have been amended and for new schools to be consulted, etc. But if you think about it, you think, oh, okay, well, 21st of July, that was right at the end of the academic year. I'm therefore going to be doing a review in November. It seems a little bit like I'm duplicating a lot of work. So for that reason, the local authority says that any plan from Easter onwards, when we're talking about phase transfers, they can go forward as the amendment notices for phase transfer annual reviews. So what we would do for this pupil, we would take the annual review from the July date, we would make that the phase transfer annual review and make that the amendment notice, and we would name both settings, both her primary school and her secondary school on that plan, and see that as the transition review, so that we're not asking you to duplicate work too quickly. And the last example. So here we've got a year 8 pupil, and she has her plan issued on the 8th of October 2020. Following annual review, the LA decide to maintain her plan on the 12th of November 2021. So we've already got a little bit of slippage there. That's gone beyond 12 months. But following the decision to maintain post-annual review, the family takes up their right to appeal, and they progress it to a tribunal. And by the time it goes through to a tribunal and they make their orders, it's now the 8th of April 2022 before the plan is changed. Now, we've therefore got sort of 3 dates we're looking at in terms of an annual review, and which date do we use? Well, assuming that there's no further requests for amendments, the annual review process will be due no later than the 8th of October 2022, meaning the annual review meeting must be held 4 weeks before that. So what we're doing here, we're going back to that original anniversary. This is where that wording, whichever is earliest, made by the DFE comes into play. The DFE essentially is saying they don't want there to be more and more slippage between annual review meetings for that whole process, because they want to make sure that, you know, that the whole annual review process is where all those conversations and inputs around a child or young person happens. If we take the November date, there was already some slippage there. If we then base our 12 months from the result of the tribunal, we're actually going a long chunk of time between all those contributions coming in terms of the pupil. So to prevent ongoing slippage, the deadline, the date for the next review meeting would come from that original anniversary of the plan, so that it prevents too much slippage. Okay, so that was all step 1. That was a lot to talk through. Now we're moving into step 2 of the annual review process. So this should be happening no more than 2 weeks before the meeting. So you have asked for all the contributions from everybody that is relevant in terms of what the provision is on the plan, and anyone within the background of that child and young person. And now you're going to send invites to the meeting along with all that information, because as we heard, in terms of parental complaints regarding an annual review process, they don't want to be surprised by new information given to them within that meeting. They should have had all that time to compose and and to digest all that information in advance so that they're not shocked by any new information. Now, in reality, it makes sense that you're not saving the date of the meeting until step 2, that people know about the meeting earlier. To me, it would make sense to tell them when the date was in step 1 and not hold that information back, so that you give them as much notice as possible. But step 2 is really important so that everybody's got that information in advance. And I know a lot of settings, you schedule out your meetings, for that whole academic year, so people do have a lot of notice. But it's really important not to forget step 2 to make sure that there's no sort of shocking information that only is brought up in the meeting itself. Okay, so looking at the meeting itself, this is what, according to the Code of Practice, the meeting should achieve and should focus on. So it should focus on progress made towards achieving the outcomes. It should establish whether the current outcomes remain appropriate, and if required, new ones should be agreed. We should be reviewing the short-term targets and setting new ones, reviewing the special educational provision and arrangements for delivering it, review any health and social care provision and check its effectiveness towards achieving the outcomes, check if the aspirations have changed, particularly in the context of paid employment and that progression to adulthood for pupils in year 9 and above, and also to check whether there is a request for a personal budget. So when you're looking at these 7 points, you can see that the real focus of the meeting, therefore, needs to look at whether the needs, provision and outcomes are still relevant. And this actually might be the best place to start the meeting, rather than feeling you've got to open up the plan and go through it in the order that it's displayed, because that could potentially cause you to get bogged down on certain points and then run out of time or have limited time to really look at the needs, provision and outcomes. Certainly when it's a non-phase transfer review, where you know that there might be there's a good chance that amendments might not be made, you might not want to go through the plan from start to finish at all. So looking back at point 3, where we're talking about short-term targets, now we know from conversations we've had within the team, particularly members in the SEN team who are former SENCOs, that this can often be problematic in instances where we're maintaining plans and therefore old short-term targets are staying on the plan. In response to this, we're definitely reflecting on that and thinking about when we review and revise the annual review paperwork, whether actually should we be including short-term targets on the plan itself, and perhaps should these be an appendix to the plan. But right now our position is that short-term targets need to be discussed and updated in the meeting. But it's important to remember, regardless of whether you're amending or not, having these contributions around the child and young person is not just for the purpose of the annual review process, and it's good practice to be keeping those records of targets outside of any annual review or EHCP process, because they're contributing to your APDR cycles, which must be happening anyway. Just a few extra points about the meeting. So for plans and annual reviews for children who are under 5, it's deemed to be perhaps too long to go 12 months without discussing those children. So the Code of Practice does say that these reviews should be happening every 3 to 6 months. Although it does go on to say that there's not that expectation that you might have the attendance of every professional within those meetings, but parents must be fully consented to any changes that's going on. For year 9 onwards, I've said already a few times, there must be that focus on adulthood, including employment and independent living. For children who are looked after, the annual review should, if possible and appropriate, coincide with the personal education plan element of their care plan. Just going back to that first point, Poppy and I are in the process of working with Jane Barnett about tailoring some training, particularly for early year settings, because there are some differences there. So we know that that's on our radar. But that last point about needs, provision and outcomes, the meeting really needs to ensure that there continues to be strong links between needs, provision and outcomes, and that all 3 feed into each other. We're aware of the layout of the annual review form and how that could perhaps not be as friendly to facilitating those conversations, and whether actually a layout where needs, provision and outcomes are laid alongside each other in a table might really make sure that is a clear focus within any changes. And this is certainly a consideration we'll make when we're looking at updating and improving the annual review paperwork. Okay, so step 4. So still thinking about the role of the setting. So you've held the meeting, and so no more than 2 weeks after the meeting is when you should be whoever's hosted the meeting should be preparing and sending a report to the local authority. It should detail all the discussions that occurred in the meeting, including any differences of opinion. And as I said earlier, it's really important that it should be clear who has said what, so that can be clearly seen on the report that you send. And also, it's important to attach all that information and evidence that was obtained in step 1, and any other relevant evidence which provides support for any changes that you might be requesting. We're going to look at the annual review report in a few slides' time, because I know that there was definitely that request from the feedback questionnaire about looking at good examples of the report. Now, in terms of step 5, so you've held the meeting, the report has been sent. Then in terms of what you should be expecting from the SEN team, from the local authority, no more than 4 weeks after the meeting, the local authority will look at the annual review report submitted and all the attached reports and responses, and they will make the decision whether to maintain the plan as it is, whether they will make amendments to it, or whether they will cease the plan. Now, a relatively new process we've put in place to improve collaborative working is that reports that we receive that aren't phase transfers, but that are requesting significant changes to the plan, including placements, are now being considered through a multi-agency panel. But I'm going to talk about this a little more later. So when the annual review report arrives at the local authority, it will be read and considered. Every single report that comes into us is looked at and is read. Then an RO, and that's, as I said earlier, stands for an assessment and reviewing officer. So an RO in the reviewing team will be allocated those that require amendments to be made. They'll use all the details within the form and all the additional information provided to make that decision, whether to maintain, amend or cease the plan. They need to see clear examples of relevant evidence to support any requested changes. And there's a real collaborative working approach within the SEN team, where each review is discussed with a wider team of ROs and SAROs. And a SARO is a Senior Assessment and Reviewing Officer. Now, we've structured our team to allow and facilitate that collaborative working, and we have age groups within the SEN team to really help that. So we have a team that's looking at early years to year 4 children, a team that's looking at years 5 to 8, and a team that's looking at year 9+. And it really allows us to have not only good collaboration within our team, but within the wider support services. So, for example, the early years area SENCOs really have close links with the early years to year 4 team, and adult social care teams will have close links with the year 9+ team. Now, going back to the point on evidence and why I've highlighted relevant in bold. When I shared this with the SEN team, with this presentation, I had originally put we need to see evidence, and the more evidence, the better. But actually, it was fed back really importantly to me that actually the SEN team and the reviewing ROs really need you to be purposeful on selecting which evidence is relevant. So that each piece of evidence plays a real part in supporting whatever requests are being made, whether that's a change to need or to provision, for example. For one, when all the evidence is uploaded onto the portal, we need to take each piece off one by one to then load it onto our system. So that takes that's not an insignificant amount of time to do all that. And it's fine if everything is relevant and if everything sort of plays that part in supporting the request for changes. But if we are seeing pieces of evidence that aren't relevant, that don't play any part, then that's time that we could have used elsewhere. And one RO did share with me that they had recently worked on an annual review report that was 193 pages long because it had so many pieces of evidence attached to it. And it was definitely the case that not all of those pieces were relevant. There might have been photos of somebody the child worked with, or perhaps a picture of a table they worked at. And it's really important that that RO is then not having to spend extra time going through each piece to decide, is that important? Do I need to look at that? Because the particular RO said it took 3 times as long to complete the amendment notice, because obviously everything that's sent to us is viewed and is looked at carefully. We need to know that everything we're looking at is important and is relevant to whatever is being requested. So whilst evidence is great and we absolutely need evidence in order to support any changes, it's really important that you reflect on the merit of each piece in terms of its relevance. Okay, so let's look more closely at the annual review report, because, as I said, based on the feedback questionnaire, there were lots of requests for wanting to see what a good annual review report looked like, and so that you could see examples of best practice. And as an aside, there's some multi-agency work going on at the local authority where we're pulling together documents within the whole process that have been nominated as showing good practice, and SENCO contributions are being counted within that process, because I know within that multi-agency team there's representatives from SENCO Forum and within the virtual schools, so they can be working out how that can then be fed back to you, because I know there's definitely a desire for that sort of support. This might seem obvious to most people, but this is what the annual review report form looks like, and this is what should be used when completing an annual review report. We do sometimes receive it on the wrong paperwork. As you can see, there's a report for students in year 8 and below, and one for year 9 and above, because that one has some questions to do with the transition to adulthood, which we know must be covered, and it should be submitted using the portal. So on that top sheet, it's really useful for the ROs opening up the annual review report. If the headlines can be signposted on that front sheet, because it gives them that really good quick snapshot of the document and which sections need particularly close attention paid to them. So you can see the report on the left is saying needs and outcomes have changed and a request for Band 6 funding is required. And on the right, there's obviously a lot going on here where there's escalating needs and a change of placement. So just a quick bit of housekeeping. It's a really, really good opportunity to check that all addresses are correct, because Capita is where we draw our addresses in terms of our correspondence. If the families haven't updated the school for a change of address, then our correspondence are going to go to the wrong address. So just a really quick question to check, our address is still current. Now, for the Pupil Voice section of the annual review report, we absolutely encourage you to use your judgment to think about how best to ensure the pupil voice is captured within the process. And it's really, really important that that annual review report has that pupil voice coming through, because that's the core of this process is the child and young person. So we want to hear that voice and to see evidence of that as much as possible. As you can see on the screen, some use the questions as they are on the form, whereas others, I know, have their own templates and processes to elicit those insights, and they can be attached as an additional document. And we welcome either, because you know the children best. So it's, I want to make that message clear. You can either use the questions as they are on the report, or you can just say see attached and show whatever documents you have that you feel best support that representation of pupil voice. For those that are working with pre-verbal children who are thinking, well, that's really challenging to capture a response, I know that there's some excellent pieces of outreach work being done within the specialist sector, and I know they're more than happy to support those that need it. And as I've said a few times already, it's really clear to make sure that you're attaching ownership to different comments. So hopefully everything is coming from the pupil or young person, but if it's not, to say, you know, mum has said this or dad has said this, for example, so we know who is saying what. A little bit more on Pupil Voice here. I know Shane Baker has produced some excellent resources on Pupil Voice, which I'm sure those in the SENCO forum can pass on, as well as the virtual school, because it was Fee Turnbull from the virtual school who highlighted these to me. So if you're not aware of those, these are what they look like, and there's some great resources here. Okay, so as you can see here from some screen grabs I've done, some schools are choosing to annotate the previous plan to record changes and conversations within the annual review meeting. And this is absolutely fine and welcomed by us, although we still do need the annual review paperwork to be completed and submitted alongside this. Although in certain sections you might just want to write see attached annotated plan in the relevant section. On screen I've put to make it clear to us whether parental views can be replaced or whether they need to go in addition to those on the previous plan. But it is important to point out when contributions are very lengthy and detailed, the RO will focus on including those of educational nature. And it's good to have a picture from both parents, particularly when we're talking about split families, so that we can see who's saying what. But I've just said it's absolutely fine to annotate a plan, and we welcome that if that's how you choose to record the conversations. But based on what I've said about that expectation on amendment notices, I just think it's something to reflect upon. If you're bringing up the previous plan in an annual review meeting where you're not expecting there to be amendments, or you're not expecting the local authority to make amendments, whether starting to make changes on the plan is the right course of action, because I know from parents that I've worked with, as soon as you're making changes, they will then have that expectation that, oh, these are set in stone, or, oh, well, we must now, we've made these changes, we need to ensure that the local authority follows through with these changes, otherwise we're doing a disservice to the child or young person. So I just think absolutely it's great to be annotating plans when you know that it's a phase transfer, or when you know that there's so much evidence to support an amendment notice. But if you're just going into an annual review where you feel that the decision is going to be to maintain the plan, whether making lots of changes on the document is going to be the right course of action. So here's just another example to see how, if you were going to annotate the plan, how you could show which bits to include, which bits to add, which bits to remove. And so just different examples here, use of strike through and bold, for example. Section E, it's really important that there are clear headings for areas of need. So here you can see it's very clear which relate to cognition and learning, which relate to communication and interaction, for example. If we compare this example to this one here on the screen, there isn't that clear layout, and so from an RA's point of view, they're going to have to spend that extra time really looking at each statement and unpicking what area of need that relates to. When I talk a little bit later about banding, when we're talking about how we work out where a pupil falls in terms of perhaps an increase to banding needs, that's going to take a lot longer to work out and to unpick which area of need each of these statements correlates to. An RO that I worked with when I was talking about annual reviews was very clear about how they often see that needs is confused on the annual review report. Needs shouldn't be where provision is detailed. Needs to make sure that that's relating to educational, health or care needs, and it shouldn't be provision. With that in mind, I know I've been talking for quite a while, and I'm sure you probably need a little bit of a brain break. So we're going to go back to Menti. I hope you're still able to access it. Some people might need to refresh depending on their phone settings, whether it's sort of kicked you out. But I thought we'd just have a little bit of a quiz on provision and needs. And I'm going to ask some questions. It's completely for fun, but it just talks a little bit about needs, provision and outcomes, and just sort of has that nice break for you. It does give you more points to answer more quickly, but as I said, it's just for fun. So which of these 4 statements is an example of a need? So is it to live independently and get a good job designing computer games? Is it moving around the school and able to organise their belongings? Is it to independently move around the school by the end of year 9? Or is it 4 visits over 3 terms? I know for some of you, that first question comes about quite quickly and there's 4 statements to read. We're going to still use those 4 statements to answer the next question, but well done to 5 of you. So the majority got that right. Yes, the need here was that this pupil was unable to organise their belongings and get to classes on time. Hopefully, though, people that got kicked out, you might be able to get back in. And for those that ran out of time, there's not as much to read this time because it's the same 4 statements. But the next question is, which of those 4 was the aspiration? So it's exactly the same statements. So we know that it's not this second one because that was the need. So which of the other 3 is the aspiration? Last few seconds. Brilliant. Yeah. So that aspiration is that long-term goal. I know that 5 of you, yes, we have got a goal there to independently move around the school by the end of year 9. But when we're talking about that aspiration, it's really that long-term outcome for their life. You know, what's their dream, their hope and wish for their life. So it was to live independently and get a good job designing computer games. Okay, next question. So it's the same statements again. So which was the provision of those 4 statements? Brilliant. So 4 visits from an OT over 3 terms to develop organizational and navigational skills. And can you see that provision is written using smart language so that you can really clearly monitor whether that's happened? Okay, next question. Okay, so which was the outcome? I hope it's obvious because it's the one we haven't picked. Last few seconds. Okay, well, interesting. Okay, so the outcome here was to independently move around school by the end of year 9. So that outcome we've really drawn that outcome where we've linked that those needs, the provision, and the outcome, and that outcome should also feed into what that long-term aspiration is. To think about, you know, how are we going to achieve that? But well done to 9 of you who got that. Okay. For these questions, you need to answer, is this a need, is this a provision, or is this an outcome? So child X is unable to make choices and has difficulty pronouncing certain speed sounds. So is that a need, a provision, or an outcome? You can tell it's the end of the day. This is running more slow than usual. Brilliant. Yeah, that's the need. Well done, everyone. Got that one. Okay, same choices. Is it a need? Is it a provision? Or is it an outcome? So additional scheduled learning breaks every 30 minutes managed by a TA. Brilliant. Yeah, that's the provision. So that's what's going to be put in place to support a given need. And you can see that provision is very clearly using SMART language. So we can see timing, we can see who's doing that, and we can see what that provision is. Okay, and again, needs, provision, outcome are your options. And the question is, or the statement is, child A is currently underachieving in a high number of his subjects. Is that a need? Is that a provision? Or is that an outcome? Yeah, that's your need there. So that's what the educational need of the child is, and therefore the relevant provision and to elicit a given outcome needs to be put in place. Again, need, provision, or outcome. By the end of Key Stage 2, child A will remain on task for at least 20 minutes. Is that a provision, a need, or an outcome? Brilliant. Yeah, that's the outcome. And you can see that again, we've got real clear timescales of what we're looking for. So that SMART target there. Okay, and it's, as I said, it was all just for fun, but it's going to give you a little leaderboard based on how you performed. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. So banding. So when there's an annual review report that requests band increases, we need to see extensive and relevant evidence so that we can use our banding forms to work out whether these requests are going to be supported. So things like behaviour incident reports, APDR cycles, assessment data, and so on. And evidence should be clearly labelled under areas of need headings. And as I showed you previously, it's very easy to see whether that's clearly labelled or not, because then this helps the RO or SARO to complete the banding form. And if any of you worked or were teaching when you had APP assessment forms, this is exactly what it reminds me of, the idea that the RO or SARO highlights evidence on the banding form. The idea is you need to highlight as the majority of each previous banding level in order to get to the higher bands. When I presented this last week, there was a question about, is this something that we need to be doing? No, you don't do banding, but if you feel that it's useful to see what's on these banding forms, then absolutely we can provide those, so you can have a look at the evidence that we need in order to get children into those different criteria for levels of banding. For those that need a little bit more guidance on what we're talking about in terms of extensive evidence, we're going to touch a bit more on evidence in a few slides' time. I said it a lot in the quiz, but we really need any changes to provision and outcomes have to be written using SMART principles. And it's really important to check that any new outcomes that you've requested are written as SMART. These two statements on the slide, those come from the Council of Disabled Children that give some really good examples of SMART targets on plans and annual reviews. It's important. The reason that I'm really stressing on SMART targets within plans is because when an RO or SARA is presented with a non-SMART provision or outcome, then the whole process is going to be delayed because they need to go back to the setting and say, actually, can you clarify this point? Who's delivering this? When are the timescales attached to this? And obviously that then means that you're having to respond to more emails or phone calls, and I know you've already got so much to do. So it's really important that everything is submitted in SMART language. For those of you that would like a little bit more support on SMART principles, I know that there's some great training that the virtual school have got on their new training brochure on SMART. So amendment processes. So I've kept saying it, but according to the Code of Practice, there isn't the expectation that plans are going to be amended on a very frequent basis, which I think is really interesting. And I don't know how aware people are of that point. As you've heard from the amount of plans in circulation, even without this guidance, we just wouldn't have the capacity as a team to be amending every plan following every annual review process. Now, that's not to say that we don't absolutely value the importance of them and that we acknowledge the hours of time that are spent within the process, but it's important to remember that impact and benefit of all these conversations and what that will have on the child or young person, and that's not just exclusive to the annual review process. But in Somerset, we have to make a priority list in terms of when and where we are making amendments and are looking to make amendments post annual review, and they are where we can see there's significant changes to the needs in terms of healthcare or a change in circumstance, when there's a request for a change of placement, or as you've heard me talk quite a lot about, when we're looking at transitions to other phases of education. So those are our 3 priority areas in terms of when we'd be looking to make amendments. We're seeing quite a lot of requests for early annual reviews, and so we're almost at the end of the presentation, but I wanted just to spend a little bit of time finishing off talking about what we expect to see has been put in place by the setting prior to making this request. So they were known as they were previously known as emergency annual reviews. We try not to call them that anymore. It's their early annual reviews, and they can be requested by any number of people. So it could be by the child or young person, by the parent, by a professional who's involved with that young person or child, by the setting, or by the local authority itself. And they should be taking place when there's a change to the need of the child or young person, and therefore the placement is at risk. We need to be informed of an early annual review before it happens. We need to have 2 weeks notice by emailing SEND Reviewing Hub. And then that allows us to allocate the early annual review to an officer, either to attend the meeting or to provide some advice prior to that meeting. Now, when we have early annual reviews, due to feelings that Section F needs to be changed, we want to see evidence that either there's been a significant change in need since the initial plan was issued, meaning that therefore the provision needs to change, or we need to see that the provision listed has been tried and isn't working and therefore needs to be changed. As I've said, we need to know that it's going to happen before it does, so that we can put support in place. We shouldn't be finding out about the early annual review after it's been held, which sometimes does happen. So as I said a little earlier, if we're receiving an early annual review where the child or young person isn't a phased transfer, but a change of placement has been requested, or there's been other significant changes coming in, and that is actually for not just early annual reviews, for any annual reviews that come in where there's a request for amendments that don't fall into those priority categories, then a new process we've put in place is that this is then going to our weekly statutory panel, which is made up of a multi-agency team, including SEN managers, EPs, and representatives from health and social care. And they're going to look at all that evidence to support the request for the change of need or change of placement. If they don't see that there's that evidence to support it, then their conclusion would be that it wouldn't be amended at this stage. They would be expecting to see an exhausted graduated response prior to the request being made. And on this checklist here on the slide, these are some examples that they would be looking to see as part of that graduated response. If after the panel discussion, the decision was not to change the placement or the provision, then a list of suggested steps based on the next steps of the graduated response would then be shared with the setting. So it's things like, has there been advice sought from relevant health and social care services? Have there been multiple MDTs? Has the child or young person been raised through the JPI? Have you experienced a significant change in needs since the plan was written, or since the last annual review, and so on? So there's lots of work going on behind the scenes in terms of coming up with an exemplar pack of resources, including many on this checklist. And obviously the core standards are being rewritten and launched in the new year, and that all is going to feed into that picture in terms of steps and graduated response. The partnership board and the virtual school are a really great resource to support with any of these checklist points, including working with advisory teachers from the virtual school who could review any paperwork prior to sending it off to us as a SEND team. And again, this may be a fault of the paperwork being clear, but it was raised last week. So I wanted to be clear within these training sessions that it is absolutely okay for settings to suggest changes to Section F, provided you've got the evidence to support that. I think there was perhaps a misconception, perhaps that settings couldn't be suggesting changes to Section F to provision, but that's absolutely okay to do so. But we need to see that clear evidence to support those changes. So this slide just gives that little bit more response and more detail in terms of what the graduated response could look like. So those not familiar with what a JPI is, that stands for a Joint Pyramid for Inclusion meeting, and that's that joint meeting with EPs and the virtual school, autism and social communication team, other professionals that meet 5 times a year. And they do lots of support work, including SENCO supervision and sharing of resources, and even sort of discussing and reviewing individual children and young people. I've talked a lot about evidence and how we absolutely need evidence, and these are just different examples of school data and what examples of that evidence could be, what we are meaning when we're talking about external reports, and so on. So that's all on this table here. And just talking about external reports and external involvement, I think it's clear just to spell out when we would expect external involvement to have been called upon. So for what sort of requests? So it's things like where we're being asked for a significant change in the amount of one-to-one support, whether it's significant class changes, whether it's a change of placement to special school, for example, and other points as per the slide here. So we're pretty much at the end of everything I wanted to say today. So thank you so much for listening in, because I know it's a bit of a graveyard shift here, and there's an awful lot to get through. We are in a moment going to go back to Menti. First of all, just to do another grading based on your understanding of annual review after this training. But also that's where we're going to have the opportunity to ask any questions. But before we went there, I just wanted to flag some more training that we've got planned based again on SENCO feedback questionnaire. So we know that there's a demand for some training on the HCP process, and that's all going to be fed in with the core standards that's going to come in February 2020. And we know one particular thing is costed plans that again needs some support with training as requested by you. And also from last week, we know personal budgets came up a little bit as well. So that's directly informed us going forward. And also, I think that's going to be this side of Christmas, perhaps early December, we're going to be doing some training on the tribunals process, because that was another key thing that was mentioned. So let me just switch back to Menti. First of all, could you rate your understanding of the annual review process again? So after listening to me for a little bit over an hour 20, if you could just now rate your understanding, that's really useful in terms of our sort of understanding of the training. And then the next question is going to allow you to ask questions. So I'll just wait another minute or so just to get everyone's responses in. So thank you everyone for giving that a score. Okay, that looks like we've got pretty much everybody. Okay, so is there anything else or any questions you've got, either based on what I've said or anything else about the annual review process that you'd like to know? So you can type in as many questions as you want, and if you click submit, and then I know Poppy and Ysanne, our EP, are going to join us to help support in those questions. If you don't have access to Menti, if your technology isn't working, then absolutely you can use the chat in Teams, and we'll monitor that as well.
We've got a few questions already, Kat,
popped
in the chat. So that might be a good place for us to start.
Yeah, let's go over to there. Oh, not letting me go to the top. I'll go from the bottom. So I have a year 4 child due to have a phase transfer. His most recent EHCP was amended and finalised in May. What should I do?
So I'm presuming, Devon, are you at a first school?
Yeah. Yes, I am. Yeah.
So what you need to have a look at is whether Section I identifies the middle school placement or not. And if it doesn't, then you will need to hold that phase transfer annual review. If it does, then you're all set.
I don't think they've decided where they want to take him yet.
Okay, so you will then need to have that phase transfer annual review and submit it by that 12th of November date in order for us to do that next bit of the process.
Okay, thanks.
So where do you get the annual review report form? So those, you can either find those on the Professional Choices website, there's all the forms there, or those should be found on the portal. This question here, I'm new in post and some of the annual reviews are delayed according to the timescales that you've set out. Should I speak to someone / inform someone? Yes, you can be contacting the SEND Reviewing Hub address if it's not clear based on your portal dates, if that's still causing confusion. Did you want to add anything to that, Poppy?
Just to say that it's always helpful just to get in contact with the families if the annual reviews are delayed, and just to inform us by emailing the SEND Reviewing Hub mailbox. It's always helpful.
Belinda, you've got your hand up.
Oh, hi, sorry.
Hi.
Oh yeah, it's a bit similar to the first question you addressed. So I've got a little boy who will be phase transfer for September because we're an infant school and he's going to be transferring to the junior school. I've planned to do his review in 2 weeks' time. I do hold my hands up to the fact that I actually had 3 different dates sent to me, asking for, you know, a timely review, but because he's got a medical condition that involved trying to get other professionals involved, it was actually quite unrealistic to have it like the first week back in September. Also, his physio was keen to have a TAC meeting, so we decided to kind of do a joint one. I don't think there will be really any amendments, but my question is that the last review I did was in May. So from what you said before, could I actually just have you know, obviously if there were no amendments, have done it early in September and just sent through what we'd done in May?
Yeah, that's right, Belinda. So you could have used that May review as that phase transfer review.
I mean, I've literally this week I've sent out the paperwork to parents, you know, to fill in, and there may well be some different they may well have some different views and feelings because his condition is degenerating, but that isn't actually impacting on the provision at the moment. So, you know, in terms of amending, there's probably not going to be anything that needs to be amended in the outcomes or the provision. It would only maybe that be their views and feelings. So I could just, I could have just submitted the one from May, couldn't I? But then that doesn't really accurately reflect their views.
Yeah, so following that review in May, because they would have been in phase transfer, we would have issued an amendment notice. I'm not sure if that's been issued for you yet,
Yes.
Belinda.
Yes, I think it. Oh, an amendment notice. I'd need to pull his file out and just double check that. I definitely had a date, which was, I think, the very first day back in September when we were on an inset day anyway. So, I knew that it would need to be done by November, so I took a punt and I planned it in for October just so I could try and get all the, you know, he's got a consultant in Bristol, and to try and get them all involved.
It takes some coordination, doesn't it?
But
with lots of professionals involved.
But now what I've learned today is that I could have actually just sent that in the first first week of September. I could have just, but I did actually email the team because I was confused because I'd had 3 different dates. So it would have been really helpful if somebody had kind of said that at the time, but you know, so now I'm a little bit, I think I'll just carry on and go ahead with the review meeting anyway, just to double check that there aren't any amendments that might need to happen. But I actually don't think, apart from the fact that he can't, you know, he has some physio exercises daily, but he can't now do them on the floor because he can't get up from the floor and he needs a bench to do that. You know, that's probably the main thing that would need to perhaps be referenced. And I don't know whether, you know, would you change just that?
What I would suggest, Belinda, is you have a look and see if an amendment notice has been issued or not.
Okay.
Because following the annual review, if it's a phase transfer annual review, we'll issue an amendment notice which will set out the changes we're proposing.
Right.
So that might be a bit of a helpful starting point for you to see if we've started that process or not. And
Okay.
the changes that we're proposing to the plan, so you can have a look at that and see if there's anything else that needs to be amended.
Right. Okay. And would I, and what about, do I need to, in a phase transfer, would I invite an RO?
You can invite the RO. We're not, because of the number of plans we maintain, we're not able to attend many annual reviews.
Again, if there were a lot of amendments, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? But if in this case I don't think there are going to be a lot, then I hadn't thought that I would do that. So okay.
But I think one of the key messages we want to get out is that those phase transfer reviews can be held after Easter up until that November deadline, because we understand that it's, you know, after the summer holidays it's a very short window to hold those reviews. So by all means, you can start holding them after the Easter holidays to give you more time.
Yeah. Okay. So in effect, I have, you know, I've done one and it's been uploaded. And actually, at that point there were a few amendments, but they were again about the child's view, because the last time he was in nursery and now he was at the end of year 1, and this time he attended the meeting, whereas before he didn't. So, but those were not, you know, they were not, there were no changes. We were notified that there were no changes. So I'm just thinking I could have just used the May one, couldn't I?
Yeah, you could have done. That's right.
Okay.
I'm conscious that we're short on time.
Thank you.
So that's okay. Thanks, Belinda. So Caroline's point here about sort of echoing that how short-term targets as an appendix would be really useful, and to see other multi-agency professionals doing that same format. That's some good feedback, Caroline, and that's the sort of thing that will be feeding back to a group where we've got multi-agency representatives within that process. So Emma's question: I'm doing the September review together for a reception child. Do I need to contact parents still to gain views, or is it okay to do the meeting okay to do it in the hour? So according to the Code of Practice, you do need to ask for views in advance, and to make sure that parents have that opportunity to hear, to give their views in advance, which is I think what you're asking. I know there's a few questions come through on Menti. Yeah, so I can see costed plan training. So Poppy, another question on personal budget. Would you want to briefly just explain what a personal budget is?
Yeah, sure. So personal budget is a summary of the funding that's attached to the EHCP. So through the annual review, a parent can request to know how much funding is connected with that EHCP, is allocated to deliver that provision. And then there's various ways that that personal budget can be delivered. So what a family could request is that they deliver part of that provision via a direct payment, and that's where school would need to be in agreement, but we would provide some of the funding that would normally be allocated to the school to the parent to deliver a specific provision. So that's a quick summary of personal budgets and direct payments, but I know that's something that's been mentioned a few times in these sessions, so I think it's something that we're quite keen to do more detailed training on.
So I think this is a good question here. I have some reviews booked in that are late in the timescales discussed. Should I take any other action on these or conduct them and make sure any future reviews meet timescales? So yes, so your dates will be worked out based on, so obviously hold the reviews as soon as you can, but then bear in mind, based on the DfE guidance, that any future reviews are going to likely then go back to the anniversary of when the plan was first written, so that you're not then doing a year from the already late dates, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's similar to what we said before, but just work with families to let them know, and if you can just drop us an email at Send Reviewing Hub just to let us know that they're going to be late, and that's fine. The more important, this DfE guidance is new, so we want to make sure we're giving you this information on due dates. It really is a helpful tool for you guys to plan your annual reviews. But it is really important that those phase transfer annual reviews come in by that 12th of November deadline.
A question about, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to another question, Catherine, but you.
Yes, no, go for it, Ysanne, go for it.
No, one of the questions I'm not sure is about, can annual reviews be coincided with a school entry plan? And I'm hoping Catherine and Poppy say yes, because I've attended those.
Yes.
And so, yes, very much so. I think that's a really good idea. I often let parents know what it's about, to let parents know we'll be getting their views, so they're prepared for the meeting. So yes, definitely they can. I think it's a really good way forward.
And what's also really helpful is if it is possible, to tie it in with PEP reviews as well for children looked after.
Definitely.
Question about, will you be sending this training to out of county schools if they have looked after children in 52-week placements?
We did invite them, I think, to the training today, but we can certainly make sure this training and slides reach them.
Yes.
I've had quite a few schools, I'm sure I've emailed you, Catherine, that I've just been in, who now, so I also go to special schools, and they also would like to find this as well. So let me know.
Yes, yeah, I imagine we'll be communicating on using channels like SENCO Forum and SEN News when the slides and recording is hosted somewhere, so that we can make sure as many as possible know where that is, because we appreciate not everyone's been able to come to these 4 sessions.
Yeah.
But I think that we've answered the majority here, and I'm very aware it's after 5:30, and everyone's got places and homes to go to. So I just wanted to thank everyone for coming and for your comments and questions, and we look forward to seeing you at future training sessions.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Catherine for putting the training together.
Oh, no problem.
Thank you both. There's a really positive comment about Catherine. We need you and our puppy as a 24/7 question advisor. I feel as though there, because I've been to a couple of these now, there are themes of questions. So it's almost like an FAQ sheet. The themed questions that people can kind of be directed to might be helpful.
Yeah, we will pull together all the questions from for the different events and do a bit of a Q&A.
Yeah, like an FAQ sheet I think might be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, you're free to go as and when you're ready. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And yes, so I think we'll be communicating, Belinda, where the slides will go. I think it's difficult to email and make sure everybody gets it. So we will be sharing where it is, because I know lots of people that wanted to come couldn't.
Yeah.
Hi, Jane.
That's
great.
I
just thought I'd say hi and say that was really, really brilliant. That was really, really useful. And I know that it obviously has a more school slant, but so much would be relevant for early years. And I just think, you know, we can easily shape something from that for the early years audience. And yeah, brilliant.
Thank you.
Very clear.
Okay.
Oh, Jacqueline, did you have a question?
Sorry, yeah, I did pop it in chat. It's just
oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. I've just got some conflicting dates on my annual review because I had to do an early one in May, and then I got my letter in July saying I've got to do it in August, and then the portal says the 10th of March, all for 2021. And I'm thinking, well, if I did it in May and I've got my amendment through, so it's who to contact to just double clarify and check which when I, because obviously I'm either very, very late or I'm okay. I've went to do my review of the EHCP.
Yeah, no, Poppy, what do you think?
I would suggest just dropping the SEN Reviewing Hub email box an email, and then we can unpick it and just let you know the reason why and which annual review to go with. It might be with the DFE advice, because it says whichever is earliest. It might be slightly different to what you're expecting, but we can have a look into that for you and just make sure it's clear the reasons why and which date to go with.
Thank you. Yeah, because I say if I did it in May, I was either late or early.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. I'll do that. Thanks so much for your time. It's been really, really useful. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Ysanne, you're coming tomorrow, aren't you? Poppy and I were just trying to work out whether it was you or Fee Man, but I think you said it was you, isn't it?
It's
brilliant.
Me. I was in Sowerdy today, and they were hoping they could come, but I don't think they can. But they'd also like the video really, and I think also because we could promote it at networks as well. Yeah. Because all of the seniors go to network meetings, just so they're aware of it as well in terms of where to find it.